Hi, I'm Cody Mustetter, a realtor here in Winnipeg. I'm here with Chad Petriw Electric, and today we're going to sit down and talk about 10 top questions for electricians in Winnipeg. And so question number one, Chad, is what inspired you to become an electrician, and how did you get started in the field?
Great question. I talk about this a lot because that's kind of my story, but I was really good in school. I loved school. All I ever wanted to do was go to university. I went to university. I hated it. It wasn't at all what I expected it to be. And I feel like I never really was exposed to trades when I was in high school, which I think is a shame. I don't think I would have necessarily chose trades at the time, but even just being exposed to it, because when university kind of fell through, I was like, now what? What do I do? Yeah. And then kind of got exposed to electrical a little bit, kind of got steered to electrical. I do think electrical is one of the best trades out there. But the idea of the apprenticeship program, the idea of electrical, the idea of trades, the need for trades, I think is a great opportunity to get into, and I think it should be talked about more. And it might also be the high schools I went to or whatever, but I do think it needs to be something that's kind of marketed a little bit more, that the university isn't the only track. There's a lot of college opportunities or trades opportunities there as well.
Totally. I do feel like recently there has been a big push for people in prioritizing trades over other types of jobs, and especially with university and colleges costing more too. I think your return on your investment in your education, you can get actually quite a bit quicker if you go into trades.
Yeah, the opportunity that specifically the apprenticeship program gives you in trades, I think is unparalleled. Like you're digging no debt, making some decent money, working while going to school, and trading off, learning on the job, learning in school. Like it's a great opportunity, I think.
Okay, so let's get into some deeper questions here. Question two, can you share some common electrical issues homeowners in Winnipeg specifically may encounter, especially in older homes?
A lot of it would be, what I'm sure we're going to get into, but knob and tube, aluminum, DIYs, like things. There are a lot of codes that we need to know. The book is massive, and so I was trying to figure out like what's safe, what's not. And knob and tube was a common type of wiring for a bunch of years. Aluminum was very common in the 70s for about 10 years. Both of them are becoming very difficult to be insured with insurance. And so kind of battling with homeowners, what does that look like? How far do we need to go? What are insurance expectations? But then more importantly, just kind of what's safe too. GFI protection on plugs near sinks, outside, stuff like that. Even things like having a hot tub and does it meet current code? Code is there for safety. Code is there for a reason. So a lot of people like to battle against what code is, but it's there for a reason for sure.
Yeah. Okay, and so for those that don't know, can you explain the difference between aluminum wiring, knob and tube, and copper, and why we've landed at copper as the best choice?
Yeah, so knob and tube is copper wiring, but it's two separate strands of wire that basically spider web through the whole house, and they're not packaged together. Then there was a period of time in there where they put those two wires in a single sheath and ran that, but it had no ground in it. And then they moved to, I believe there was a small period of time where they had a ground in it, and then in the 70s they thought, let's use aluminum. Aluminum is really cheap. It's way cheaper than copper.
Yeah.
The problem is it's really cheap. So over the years they realized there are some problems with it. Now, ironically, we do still use aluminum. We use aluminum in a lot of commercial applications with bigger wiring.
Okay.
So when you're running like a 2-watt cable for 200 amps, the copper is going to be $30 a meter. The aluminum is like $10 a meter.
Wow.
And so as long as it's treated properly, it's safe, as long as it's monitored a little bit. But in the home application, lots of issues, and homeowners can't necessarily diagnose it and keep it safe and maintain it properly. So now we're kind of moving into there. And so aluminum, because it's so cheap, it expands and contracts with temperature change a lot more.
Yeah.
And so over time, usually 15, 20, 30 years, like it's not immediate, but over time that loosens a screw, creates some arcing, creates heat, creates melting on the wire, which definitely can be quite dangerous. And so then after that, they went to copper, 3-wire in a sheath, a hot, a neutral, and a ground. The ground is there for life safety. They do talk a lot about like electronics and stuff like that. I'm not an electronics expert, but there are much better things you can do to protect your electronics with surge protectors and things like that. But the ground is there specifically for life safety, so that if there's a problem with the circuit, it trips the breaker.
Yeah.
So now we're in copper, sheathed with like a not a rubber sheathing, like a nylon sheathing, and that's kind of where we're at nowadays.
Okay, and so As you are looking at a home, lots of people are scared when they see different types of wiring. I know it's a common issue that a lot of first-time home buyers face. How much of an issue is it to get knob and tube or aluminum replaced?
Yeah, and that's probably one of the biggest things that I'm battling with. Insurance has kind of come to the point. When I started the trade, insurance was saying, oh, we just need a full inspection and a letter from an electrician. They just don't want to be liable. They want someone else to be.
Sure.
Through my career, now insurance companies say you got 30 days to get that out, or 60 days, or whatever that process looks like. And they are adamant that we will not insure homes that have knob and tube. So then we have a process to get that. A lot of people don't realize how difficult that process can be. It's rewiring a whole house that's already finished. So fishing wires and cutting boxes out and dealing with a lot of lath and plaster. A big thing we're starting to get into is kind of making sure there's no asbestos in the house and things like that. But it can be an invasive process, but it's usually, depending on the home, a 3-4 day process. And we just kind of work with the homeowner to make sure they have an expectation of what this looks like. I do have some articles on my website that kind of talk about what that process looks like, because it's so hard to go over it in 10 minutes or whatever you are with the customer. And then same with aluminum. I do think aluminum will get to the point where insurance is not insuring it. Insurance is always kind of moving that way. But right now, a lot of insurance companies accept just treating it. And I personally do think just treating it is a viable option. Like I said earlier, you're not having many issues in the first year or two. It's 10, 15 years down the road. So if you treat it properly now, you've got another 10, 15 years before you should kind of look and treat it again. The less aluminum's touched, the better it is, because it slowly becomes brittle over time. I do think there will be a time where we start rewiring aluminum houses, and it also comes down to the homeowner's comfortability. So are they sitting there saying, I know someone who had a bunch of problems with aluminum, I do not want to live with it? Then yeah, we definitely need to have this conversation and see what that process looks like. If they're saying, no, I just want to satisfy insurance, okay, let's find out what exactly your insurance company is requesting and go from there.
Because I've seen recently insurance companies quote some of my clients they had to replace knob and tube in 30 days.
Yeah.
And that was the window. If they didn't do it then, they wouldn't insure the home. But in the past, like even a couple of years ago, it was, oh, you got to get it done in the first year. And then if you don't do it, we won't renew the insurance for the year after. And so that's changed even recently.
Yeah, and for us, I think they're just trying to scare the homeowner more than anything, to say like, you can't just sit on this for a year and forget about it, or tell us next year, oh, we didn't get it done yet, we want an extension. But those 30 days, if the homeowner is advocately looking for an electrician, getting quotes, and eventually maybe dealing with me, I can usually then write a letter and say, look, this isn't realistic. We can't get in there by the certain date. Can we get an extension of 30, 60 days, whatever that looks like? And I've never had an issue with an insurance company to say like, nope, it has to be done by this date or we're done. Yeah. So it's working with them as well.
That's good to know. And so, okay, this is a really hot question for people in Winnipeg with inflation being so high, costs so high. People want to know what's a good tip to bring down your monthly energy costs?
Great question. And like the market changes so fast in electrical in terms of like LEDs getting introduced, technologies getting introduced, smart systems are getting introduced. So with that, it's not really what your mom and dad or your grandma and grandpa used to do, where it's like, make sure you turn off every light in the house at all times.
Close the fridge in 1 second.
Exactly. Those are definitely changing. Like you could leave your LED lights on, and a lot of people want more light everywhere, outside, inside. But monitoring things that have heat, so like a hot tub, for example, draws a significant amount of power. What does that look like? If you're not using it much in the summer, maybe you turn that off or disconnect it or whatever at the time. There are a lot of smart systems, so getting in programming so that you make sure that some things turn off during the day. And like turning lights off isn't a bad thing. Like it definitely does cost money. It's negligible. But maybe that's the habit you need, is make sure you turn off all the lights, because then that also makes sure that you turn off everything. You lower the air conditioner during the day when you're away. But even then, you've got all the smart thermostats and things like that. So like the smarter your home gets, the more cost savings it is. But finding things that have heat are definitely like the highest draw of power. So like I was even talking to my wife and saying like, maybe if you use the less of the oven and more of the air fryer, it's on for way less. And so like little things like that like anything that draws heat, curling irons, hair blowers, kitchen appliances, there's so many of them now. All of that, just being very conscious about what you're using and when you're using it.
Yeah, because like the modern day light bulb draws a fraction of the amount of power as it used to, right?
Yes.
And so that's not as much of a concern.
Yeah. No, we also do have a lot more. It used to be one
That's
single
also
light
true,
bulb
yeah.
in a bedroom, and now we've got 4 to 6 pot lights. So like, does it even out? Yes. Our even though we like to complain about it, our cost for electricity is very reasonable in Manitoba right now.
Yeah.
But doesn't mean you want to just waste electricity either.
Totally. Okay, can you explain the importance and maybe the difference between GFCIs and AFCIs? And I know we kind of touched on having grounded circuits already, so you can kind of...
Yeah, GFIs, from what I've heard, is that the guy who created it grabbed a hair blower, jumped in the bathtub, and showed that, hey, this won't kill me, which I think is really cool. If it's not a true story, I just say it is. I don't want to know.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea is that anything near water, and especially outside, anything near a hot tub, anything near a pool, anything near a bathtub or a sink, so that if you have an appliance and it gets water in it or falls in a sink or something, it trips. A little bit more technical is there's a hot and a neutral, and it kind of cycles electricity. And if that potential difference equals 0.06 milliamps, then it trips the circuit. So it's very, very quick.
Okay.
And so like it's monitoring that. And a lot of people have problems with GFIs. GFIs do have moving parts in them, so they tend to fail sometimes. Or people plug an extension cord outside, leave it laying in the snow, or it rains outside and some water gets in there. If water gets in the electrical system, it trips. And that's for safety. Sometimes the GFI fails, sometimes it's tripping because it should be tripping. And it's just balancing that. Overall, it's safer to have it. And so I often lean towards, even though this can be a nuisance, the pros far outweigh the cons.
Well, and like if you're annoyed that it's tripping because it has water in it when it could have been a much bigger, like, I don't know, I feel like you have to get used to...
I definitely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't complain too much about going to flip the breaker. when
Exactly.
It could have blew up your whole
And there are ways to
circuit.
do it, like having the plug nearby where you can just kind of reset it. Arc faults now are something kind of different, look exactly the same, so a lot of people get them confused. But the idea of if you were vacuuming and you have the vacuum on and you unplug the vacuum from the wall with the vacuum on and you see that little bit of an arc, it trips the breaker now.
Okay.
And so they started the code where it just had to be in every bedroom. And it made a lot of sense to me because there's a lot of linens, you got bed skirts and bedding and pillows and clothes.
Yeah.
And so they want to prevent that if there's ever an arc. Now it's kind of come into a point where it's the whole house. There's only 3 circuits that don't need arc fault protection. Arc fault protection, the technology is still kind of catching up to where it is.
Okay.
We do have a significant amount of nuisance tripping. We are trying to work with the city right now to kind of find what that viable option is. Power tools outside, they'll often, not all of them, but some of them will trip an arc fault breaker, and microwaves. I would say about 50% of microwaves right now trip an arc fault breaker.
Okay.
Depends on brand too. We've been working with different brands. We've been working on different setups. They can cause some nuisance, but again, the idea there is so many fires were started because of this. How do we remedy that? And so it's kind of now the technology is sort of catching up to where we're at.
Okay, well, that's good. And I guess, so if someone's going to be doing some DIY work for themselves, would you have any recommendations in both of terms of GFEIs, arc fault, and like sort of understanding those different regulations, or do you have to pull permits for that?
You should be pulling a permit anyway, and homeowners can pull their own permits if they're doing the work. Misconception sometimes is that a homeowner wants to pull their own permit for an electrician to do the work, and that they can't do. If the electrician's doing the work, they have to have the permit.
Yeah.
But knowing the code, and I said the code book was super big and it's written like a lawyer document, but there are versions, electricians for dummies or electrical for dummies. I'm sure that exists, but finding ways that just kind of like summarize what's going on. Manitoba Hydro, I'm pretty sure they have like a version that's kind of more in plain English that can kind of say, hey, this is what needs to go on. And just knowing, or talking to an electrician to say, like, I'm looking at rewiring a few things. What do I need to do for arc faults or GFIs? Like, I know what I'm doing, but I just don't know all the current code, and I want to make sure it's up to code, as well as for inspection, it's going to want to have it pass, so.
Yeah. I remember one time I was doing some electrical work on one of my houses, and most of the time I feel like you only got to be electrocuted once to learn your lesson. I got electrocuted twice, and my wife said, if it happens a third time, you're calling Chad right now. And Again, I'm looking back and I kind of laugh at that because it was like I had to get electrocuted 3 times before I called an electrician. Once would have been enough, but
Yeah.
it happened twice, and then the third time I was like I can't have it happen again. But I won't get into the details of how it happened. But
That's fair. Yeah. A lot of people are afraid of electrical too, so it sometimes it's a good fear.
well, yeah, I don't touch it anymore. I feel like I'm hypersensitive to it now.
That's good. You learned the hard way.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you approach troubleshooting electrical problems in a house?
Yeah, so it's a lot of experience, which definitely helps. Hey,
Sure.
I've seen this before.
Yeah.
Where a lot of homeowners are like, oh, you came in here and fixed that really quick. I fixed that because I have 15 years of seeing these problems.
Yeah.
But kind of going in there to see like, where does the problem start? What does typically the homeowner have to say about it? And what have I seen in the past? Because sometimes the homeowner will say something that's really unrealistic to what's happening, but it at least explains the issue that's happening. So based on previous experience, where could that problem be? And like you've got the breaker, you've got the wiring, and you've got the electrical outlet, for example. It's not a complex system, but where is that issue happening? And kind of finding a way to work your way back to see, like, is it just a failed breaker? Is it just a failed plug? Or is there a bigger issue kind of in between behind drywall sort of thing?
And that's something that's really hard to do if you've never had any experience in it.
Yeah, I'd say the best thing I have is just the experience that I have seeing these things in the past. And even like sometimes commercial electricians, they can't diagnose it. And it's only because they haven't seen things like this. They don't work with it very regularly, so.
Yeah, okay. And so, I know we talked about arc fault already, but what sort of trends do you see going towards in the electrical residential systems?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing is the smart technology. We were talking a little bit about that before. It's changing so rapidly. It's becoming so affordable. I remember as a kid, I read somewhere that like Bill Gates had his house where he could walk into his office, the blinds would go up to whatever level, the thermostat would change, and the lights would be at a certain dim level. But when the maid came in, the blinds would go right up and it would get a little bit cooler in there and the lights would be super bright. And I was like, that's insane. Whereas we're basically there now. Like an average home can have something like that. So I think the technology with that, like even for timers, smart switches are way cheaper than even just an astronomical timer now. Smart lighting on the exterior, even little things like geocaching where like you can drive up to your house now and have some smart lights come on. That can be done with just a switch or it can be done with smart light bulbs. I think that's the biggest thing that's starting to change and become way more affordable. Cameras, security, monitoring consumption, like things like that. And I think that's going to continue to grow and rapidly change.
What are some important safety tips for homeowners, or when should they sort of look at their electrical and say, oh, I need to do some maintenance, or I need to get a professional in here to look at stuff and sort of upgrade?
Yeah, great question. Some normal safety things, like we talked about GFI, AFCI, but then also like smoke detectors. A current code now that came in somewhere around 2012 is hardwired interconnected smoke detectors in every bedroom and every floor, a smoke CO on every floor. Not saying you have to just jump and bring your house up to current code. You'll be changing that every 3 to 4 years if you do that. But finding these things that like, hey, I'm looking at my kitchen counter and a lot of them don't have GFI protection. What does that look like? What's the cost? What will this take to rewire or make safer? AFCI, I wouldn't say is necessarily as important unless you're doing a reno. Let's bring that up to code.
Okay.
But I wouldn't jump in and be like, oh, I need to arc fault my whole house.
Yeah.
Smoke detectors, I think, are a great thing. There's battery backup smoke detectors, there's battery operated smoke detectors, and then there's the hardwired with battery backup. And kind of getting that up to code, because fires do happen. We don't want them to, but making sure that's safe. And if your electrical, especially in your basement or at your panel, looks really messy, means a lot's been done over the years. I used to think it was crazy that when I started the trade that everything should be like really neat and straight. And I'm like, but it functions the same. But it just means you took pride in your work. And if you take pride in your work, it's going to be done properly, it's going to be done safely. And so if you have a whole bunch of wires all over the place, it might be a good idea just to have someone come take a look or take some pictures and ask and be like, hey, there's been a lot done here. Should I be worried about anything that's going on here?
Yeah, that's my favorite thing about new construction homes is when you walk in, you see the panel, and all of the electrical is so nicely laid out, and it's all color coordinated and everything.
Yep.
Oh, it fires me up. I'm always
I would
so
look
excited.
at Instagram and stuff and find those pictures. I'm like, oh, that looks great.
Yeah, and then you go to the old homes and it's like coming in from different angles.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's like can be a rat's nest in there.
Definitely can be.
Okay, so just wrapping up, because you're local in Winnipeg, I just wanted to ask you, what's one of your favorite things to do in Winnipeg?
Great question. I love Winnipeg. I kind of bounced around a little bit, didn't like it growing up, and then left, and then didn't want to come back and came back. And now that I'm back, I'll never leave. I love Winnipeg. I love what it offers.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things that we do, like me and my family, is finding it's a really cool market for food. Some really cool restaurants, some local restaurants. Not necessarily chain food restaurants, but just some local people. I've even done some work for guys who own restaurants. And then I go to the restaurants and be like, hey, yeah, I've done some electrical work for you. But really just kind of hitting up that scene and finding some good places to eat and just have a good night and good atmosphere.
Yeah, lots of local good eats here.
I agree.
So, all right, Chad, that's it. Thanks for coming and dropping all your electrical knowledge with us. And so that's it for the video. Thanks.